1963, February 1st, the city of Ankara, Turkey, was experiencing one of its busiest and most crowded hours. It was a Friday, and the weather was surprisingly beautiful, but within moments, airplanes would fall from the sky onto the people below, and this event would become a real tragedy in history. That day, a passenger plane belonging to Middle East Airlines, carrying 11 passengers and 3 crew members, had taken off from Lebanon and was preparing to land at Ankara Esenboga Airport at around 4 p.m. After stopping in Ankara for refueling, the aircraft would continue its journey. The aircraft last contacted the control tower at 4:10 p.m., requesting permission to land at 4:25 p.m. The crew reported that they had descended from 8,000 feet to 6,500 feet. As the plane glided through the sky, everything seemed completely normal. At the same time, a Douglas C-47 military transport aircraft belonging to the Turkish Air Force had taken off from Ida Mesket military airbase for a training flight. The aircraft was also in the sky with 3 military personnel on board. After taking off at 2:22 p.m., the C-47 had completed the training portion of its flight. Following nearly 1.5 hours of training, the aircraft, just like the passenger plane, turned back toward the airport. As a result, both aircraft ended up sharing the same route over the skies of Ankara within a short period of time. Up to this point, everything may seem normal. However, the real danger began when both crews, fooled by the clear weather and good visibility, chose to fly visually instead of relying on their instrument flight systems. Moreover, neither the Esenboga Airport control tower nor the passenger plane was aware that the military aircraft was in the air. As a result, the 2 aircraft unknowingly began moving closer and closer to each other, and by the time they finally noticed one another, it was already too late. Because of their high speed, the pilots' last-second maneuvers failed to prevent the disaster. Seconds later, at an altitude of 2,130 meters, the 2 aircraft collided violently over Ankara. Just minutes earlier, life in the heart of the city had been continuing as normal, but at exactly 4:12 p.m., a massive noise suddenly echoed through the city, followed by the sound of an explosion. At first, nobody understood what had happened, but it soon became clear that the aircraft had exploded in midair, turning into giant fireballs. Huge pieces of wreckage, along with people, began falling rapidly from the sky into the center of the city. What happened nearly 2,000 meters above the ground was described by witnesses below as a bright red aircraft, missing its tail and wings, gliding rapidly toward them from the sky. Within moments, the disaster turned the entire district into a massive field of wreckage. Traffic came to a complete standstill, and cars and people began crashing into each other in panic. People desperately ran into buildings and shops, trying to save themselves, but the disaster found them even where they tried to hide. The horrifying scenes became even more terrifying as thick smoke covered both the sky and the streets of Ankara. Some passengers were thrown out of the cabin at the moment of impact after the sudden air pressure tore the aircraft apart. Their bodies were later found shattered on the rooftops of buildings. One flight attendant fell onto the roof of a building while still strapped to her seat, burned by the flames. Hats, bags, shoes, lifeless bodies, and severed limbs were scattered across the streets. Despite attempts to escape with parachutes, none of the 3 Turkish officers aboard the military aircraft survived, sadly. The 3 crew members and 11 passengers on the passenger plane also lost their lives. But the tragedy was not limited to the people inside the aircraft. The greatest loss of life happened on the ground. As the explosion-like impact of the crash spread across different neighborhoods of the city, scenes of chaos erupted everywhere, turning the area into a battlefield. The local people became the first victims of the wreckage scattered from the sky. Large parts of the military aircraft crashed onto the shanty houses in the Bint Derisi area, turning them into complete ruins. The residents, completely unaware of what was happening, thought there had been an earthquake or that bombs were falling because of a war. Moments later, many of them lost their lives after being trapped beneath the massive debris. Later, 5 bodies were recovered from those destroyed homes. Meanwhile, The passenger plane, whose left wing had separated from the fuselage, completely lost control and crashed onto the business buildings near Anafartlar Street. Inside these buildings were the Istanbul Bank and Garanti Bank branches. After the crash, the impact and explosion caused the gas pipes inside Istanbul Bank to burst into flames. At the same time, fuel from the aircraft's fuel tanks intensified the fire even further. The flames completely blocked the bank's exit doors, making it impossible for anyone to enter or escape. As a result, both customers and employees were trapped inside, unable to get out through the iron-barred windows. Many of them lost their lives from the fire and smoke inside the building. If the bank had possessed an emergency exit or a fire escape, perhaps no one would have died there. And tragically, this was not the end of the disaster. The massive fireball swept through the streets, engulfing pedestrians, shoe shiners, and everyone who happened to be there that day. Burned and unrecognizable bodies were scattered everywhere, while the heavy smell of smoke and death filled the area, making the scene even more horrifying. Can you imagine it? People who were simply walking through the city that day for completely ordinary reasons suddenly had an airplane crash down on top of them and lost their lives in a terrible fire. After news of the disaster spread, every fire brigade and rescue team in the city was dispatched to the scene. Ambulances from all hospitals rushed to the area as well. Military units and police officers also joined the rescue efforts. While government officials arrived at the crash site shortly afterward, they inspected the scene, supervised the debris removal operations, and later visited the injured victims in hospitals. On the first day, newspapers reported that 68 people had lost their lives in the disaster. However, as more bodies were recovered from beneath the wreckage and severely injured victims later died from their injuries, the death toll eventually rose to 120. The victims were laid to rest during a funeral ceremony held on February 5, 1963. Because of the tragedy, a period of mourning was declared in Ankara. All entertainment venues in the city, including cinemas and theaters, remained closed for days. On the radio, only classical music was played while updates and information about the disaster were broadcast. But the biggest question everyone wanted answered was this: what caused the crash, and who was responsible for the disaster? After the disaster, an investigation commission from Middle East Airlines arrived in Ankara from Lebanon. In its first report, the commission concluded that the military aircraft was responsible for the collision. For this reason, the initial investigation concluded that the Turkish military pilots were at fault for flying without proper instrument guidance and for failing to inform the control tower about their training flight. The passenger aircraft, on the other hand, was found not responsible for the collision. That was the first, and according to many, the accurate report. That's all for today. Subscribe to BATUNIGMA for more mysteries, and don't forget to like the video.